Okay, I think we will get started. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're at in the United States. So we welcome everyone to our informational webinar on our partial to full accreditation initiative. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. You should have received these PowerPoint slides via email before this presentation. If not, you can access these slides as well as a recorded webinar, which will be posted to our partial to full initiative webpage on Clinic's website. The link to that webpage is listed at the end of the slide presentation under resources. And also, if you have any questions during this webinar, please post them in the Q&A box so it does not get lost in the chat query or get overlooked. We will answer your questions during the course of the presentation or at the end when we have more time for questions and answers. So my name is Helen Chen, and I am joined here with my colleague, Elizabeth Carlson. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Helen. Hi, everyone. Good to be with you today. I am a supervising senior attorney with Clinic in the Training and Technical Assistance Program, and I'm based in DC.
So like Liz, I am also in the Training and Technical Assistance section of Clinic for about 10 years. So I provide primarily as well as DOJ recognition and accreditation. So this is our agenda today. So this will be our 7th year having this partial to full accreditation initiative. We really look forward to training more individuals to become fully accredited representative. So here is a quick recap covered today. We are going to discuss the purpose of our to full accreditation initiative and provide you an overview of what it is. We will also go over the eligibility criteria for being selected into this P2F training program. We will also visit the timeline of activities you can expect, including the application process, that covers the P2F initiative, as well as materials for obtaining full accreditation. And lastly, we'll save some time for the remaining time that we have for questions and answers. So I do want to remind everyone that this is an informational webinar about our partial to full accreditation initiative. It is not about the requirements or the application process for obtaining partial or full accreditation. If you would like to know more information about how to obtain partial or full accreditation, please visit our DOJ Recognition Accreditation Toolkit. You can access that toolkit through the partial to full accreditation webpage, which is the URL listed in the back of the slides. And in that toolkit, you will find a recording applying for DOJ Recognition Accreditation, as well as a webinar on applying for full accreditation. So I'm going to pass it over to Liz to talk about the goals and approach for our initiative.
Yeah, thank you so much, Helen. So we are really excited about this initiative. And the reason that we're so excited and so passionate about it is due to the critical need for representation in immigration court proceedings for non-citizens who are facing removal, right? So we know that there is a lack of high quality, affordable representation for individuals. And we also know how much representation matters to the outcome of removal proceedings, right? So people who appear in immigration court without an attorney or without an accredited representative are much less likely to secure relief from removal and much more likely to be ordered removed from the United States. And we know that, many of you are already partially accredited, but in order to provide removal defense representation, you do have to have full accreditation with the Department of Justice. So how are we going to sort of address this lack of representation, and what is the approach of this program? So the idea here is to provide a robust removal defense training, including training on court skills as well as full accreditation application support to partially accredited representatives. So this is a sort of initiative and program that lasts over the course of several months, and we'll go through the timeline in a moment. But basically, we start out with some individual work, which is incorporating recorded webinars that you'll watch, a case assessment exercise, review of the case file, and that's going to culminate in a multi-day live trial skills training in Atlanta, Georgia, which is very exciting to be back in person for the first time in several years, where the participants will have the chance to practice skills related to representation in removal proceedings. So that would include skills like conducting a direct examination, a cross-examination, and a closing argument. And then following that training in February of 2024, Clinic will provide support in the full accreditation application to the Department of Justice. And so that is basically sort of our goal and our approach. And I'll turn it back to Helen to talk about the eligibility criteria for this initiative.
Thanks, Liz. So for eligibility criteria, who is eligible to apply for a partial to full accreditation initiative for this training program? So we're going to be looking at the 5 criteria when reviewing applications submitted by individuals. So you should already be a partially accredited representative currently working for a DOJ recognized organization. We may make a few exceptions for those who are not partially accredited. For instance, this may apply to individuals who may have already satisfied the requirements for partial accreditation, such as taken enough trainings, gained immigration experience working under the supervision of an immigration attorney or a credit rep, but you just never got around to applying for partial accreditation. They may have also even started or have experience working on removal defense cases with an attorney. For instance, one of our participants from the 2022 cohort was accepted into the training program last year. He never received partial accreditation, but had been working with a remote defense attorney for a couple of years and have taken several immigration law trainings. He was able to apply. We accepted him in our training program, apply for full accreditation recently, and was just approved. So if space allows, we definitely will consider those without partial accreditation, given that they meet those requirements. And so upon finishing this training program, participants will apply for full accreditation. We will expect participants to have prepared and filed an application for full accreditation by August 31st, 2024. And once participants obtain full accreditation, we expect them to provide removal defense. Ideally, fully accredited representative will start accepting removal defense cases immediately, but we are realistic and understand that it may take some time for new reps to take on several removal defense cases. So as long as there's a good faith attempt for you to take at least one case within the first few months as a rep, should be fine. And lastly, we hope your program supervisor will be very supportive in your endeavor to obtain full accreditation. What this means is to provide you with the adequate resources and time to complete this training program, helping to set up a system for the program to start accepting removal defense cases if it is not already doing so, and working with you on balancing and managing your workload once you become fully accredited rep, so you're able to start taking on removal defense cases. So every year we have a number of individuals interested in applying for the partial to full accreditation training program, and usually exceeds the number of spots that are available. So for our selection process, we are giving preference to clinic affiliates who has partial accreditation. However, as I mentioned, we will also accept individuals who have not have obtained partial, but is looking to go straight to full as well. We will also accept applications from those not affiliated with clinic, provided that they meet the eligibility requirements and if space allows. And then each year, of course, individuals who are already fully accredited reps have contacted us wanting to take this training. And so in the instance that space allows, we will definitely consider them for the training program. And if accepted into the program, we do require that they continue or to take on removal defense cases. So again, we will prioritize our selection process with clinic affiliates first. We have partial, non-affiliates with partial accreditation, and then fully accredited representatives. And lastly, given that we have limited space in our training program, we will not be accepting attorneys into this training program this year. And interested individuals will need to submit an application, which is posted on our P2F webpage. The link should be activated after this information webinar if it's not already. And the application will include a series of questions. Your responses will allow us to gauge whether your program has the capacity to undertake or continue removal defense work. And if you will be supported in this endeavor, we will also look to see if you have identified a mentor who is an attorney or fully accredited representative with removal defense experience and who you can shadow and gain some immigration court experience. This part I mentioned is very important for those looking to submit a full accreditation application, which I will discuss a little bit later. We will also consider your geographic location and the immigration court where you will provide removal defense to assess the feasibility by your organization to provide removal defense and the need for removal defense in your area. And I'm going to pass it over to Liz right now to discuss the timeline of activities.
Sure, and we have some sort of deadlines coming up in the next month. So today is July 11th. So we have just a few weeks to get in the online application if you are interested. So the deadline to submit the online application for consideration by clinic is August 1st. And we'll review the applications relatively quickly. So by August 18th, you should get notification of your selected status, whether you've been accepted into the partial to full initiative. And within a week of that, we would ask, that you provide confirmation of participation in the program. And then by September 1st, it would be the deadline for completion of the registration process, which includes the registration payment of $395 and submission of the agreement signed by the participant and the participant's supervisor. So the fee would include, access to the recorded webinars, the in-person training in Atlanta, and the technical support after the training concludes with the application. It also includes room and board and food for the time in Atlanta, but does not include transportation. Okay, so you would be responsible for the transportation cost to get to Atlanta in February, but the $395 essentially covers everything else, including room and board and food. All right, so let's move on. So that's sort of the initial kind of preliminary steps. Then we're getting into that first orientation webinar that's going to take place on September 12th. We're going to discuss expectations, review the schedule, answer questions as well. We're going to be essentially talking a little bit in more detail about what the case is that you're going to be following. So this is a case for teaching purposes. This is not a real case, but it is in fact based on a case, and this is a case that we've used a couple times in the past. So essentially, you're going to be thinking about this case as if it were a real case. So you're reading through it, you're preparing your sort of mock client for court. Okay, so we'll talk about more about the specific case in September, but that's sort of the idea here, is that we're preparing and following a particular case that's getting ready for immigration court proceedings. The other thing that you want to start thinking about in September is your immigration court observations. So one of the requirements for this initiative, because it is also a requirement for the full accreditation application, is that you observe an immigration court hearing, either master calendar or ideally an individual hearing. So you can do that by sort of reaching out to practitioners in your area, or if you have any issues with that, with finding a hearing to observe, you can let us know and we can hopefully help you with that process as well. So that's sort of the initial stages. And then we're getting into, I guess I would say, sort of September through December, we're getting into this kind of really self-directed work where you're going to be focused on these recorded webinars that are going to get us prepared for that in-person training in February. So these are pre-recorded webinars. You can watch them on your own time, but we do provide sort of a suggested schedule to keep you on track so that you're not falling behind in the work. So there are webinars addressing the anatomy of a removal hearing. So what does a removal proceeding look like? Who are the players in it? And what are the practice rules to appear before the Executive Office for Immigration Review? And how do you find those rules? What are the ethics of providing immigration court representation? And we're also there's also a webinar that touches on program considerations for removal defense, the rules of evidence in immigration court. There's a webinar about non-LPR cancellation of removal. So this is the form of relief that our sort of mock client is going to be seeking in immigration court. It's complex. It has a number of statutory requirements. So we're going to sort of dive into the requirements there, as well as a webinar on how to do a case assessment, right? So how do you look at the elements of the statute, the elements that your client needs to show, and then match those to the facts, right? So what are the facts in your client's case? What are the evidence you can use to prove that your client meets the elements of the case? There's also a number of reading materials that we would want you to become very familiar with, including a case file that we're going to be using, both during the in-person court skills training and for that case assessment exercise that's going to be due in mid-January, by January 12th. So on this timeline, all the webinars, again, which are self-directed, you watch them, at your own time, but per our suggested schedule, those have to be completed by January 5th, and then our case assessment by January 12th. Okay, and that case assessment exercise is really, really important. It's going to be important for you having sort of success in the in-person training. Okay, so it's kind of all this work is building upon each other to set us up for success when we finally get to in-person in February. So if we can go on to the next slide. Again, we see kind of continuing with reviewing the case file. We complete the case assessment and all the webinars, and then our in-person training in Atlanta, Georgia, from February 6th to February 8th. So attendance is required for the entire duration of the training. So you do need to commit to attending in person in Atlanta. I saw a couple of questions. Is there a virtual option? There is not a virtual option this year. You do have to attend the training in person in Atlanta. We have done virtual the past few years, mostly because of the pandemic, but we're excited to get back in person. I know that it's pros and cons for folks in terms of, the difficulty of traveling a long distance versus kind of, I think, is a richer experience to be in person. So we're doing in person this year and or early next year, and hopefully that will work for a lot of folks. And then finally, that's sort of rounding out the process here. Again, we do ask you to post your immigration court observations to the course website, and we give you up until essentially before we meet in person. So up until February 5th to post those. And again, if you have issues with finding an immigration court hearing to observe, definitely let us know. We also have a short writing assignment as part of this initiative, and that's because a writing sample is required as part of the application for full accreditation. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to include this as part of the course. We provide you some feedback on the writing sample. It's not very long. Usually doesn't take too much time to prepare, but would give you a sense. In the past, we've sort of done, drafting a motion to the immigration court, give you a sense, for example, of motions practice in immigration court. And in terms of, we can go, yeah, Perfect. The court skills training itself. So this is really, I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be really exciting. It's going to be 3 full days of in-person work. Usually we'll end a little bit earlier on the 3rd day to allow folks, to get any afternoon or evening flights if they're flying back that same evening. But it's going to be sort of a jam-packed schedule when we're in Atlanta. So we have different workshops and trainings on that case assessment that I've been talking about. And then just sort of preparing for what you can expect when you're in a trial, an immigration court, right? So how do you conduct a direct examination of your client? How do you refresh a client's recollection if they can't remember a specific date? How do you object in immigration court? How do you respond to objections by the government? How do you prepare your client that there might be interruptions for objections by the party? How do you prepare your client for cross-examination, right? That's really sort of a tough thing often to explain what it is. And how to sort of prepare a client for those tough questions that they're going to get on cross-examination. What is a redirect examination, and what circumstances should you do it? When should you not do it? How do you do a closing argument in immigration court? There's a sort of fun workshop that we do, a what would you do skit and discussion if you're in immigration court and something sort of weird and strange happens and you don't know how to respond. This is our opportunity to sort of think through it before you're actually in that situation. So the idea is it's very interactive. There's a lot of work divided into small groups with different trainers working with the small groups. Typically, we have a retired immigration judge that attends the training with us, who always has just wonderful insights and building on sort of the years of experience in the field and on the bench, which I think again makes it a really unique and rich experience for the participants to have that kind of expertise and knowledge. So again, we can expect although it will be a lot of hard work and probably feel pretty intense for those few days that you're there. I think it's sort of just a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful learning experience. So that's sort of the training aspect of it. And then I'll turn it back to Helen to talk about, once that's complete, preparing the full accreditation application, and maybe even a little bit before that, talking about immigration court observations.
Thank you, Liz. After you finish the core skills training, and even before, to kind of think about, the long-term game plan is for you to apply for full accreditation. And this is by submitting an application to the Office of Legal Access Programs, and OLAP, short for Office of Legal Access Programs, will want to see that you have some court experience. So Liz kind of mentioned about getting in those master hearings as well as individual hearings experience on your plate. This is really good prep work for you to have the skills as well as the confidence to be able to accept cases once you get approved. So this means developing your legal advocacy, writing skills, and working with your mentor on removal defense cases. And oftentimes this is the most time-consuming part of your application process, other than the trainings, of course, but getting enough court experience is something that we've seen held many people back from submitting their full accreditation applications. So we want you to start preparing this early on. It's really good to have the trainings as well as getting the experience at the same time. It's a really good complement to get the full scope of what representation will involve, court representation will involve. And so to be selected for the partial to full accreditation initiative, we will require applicants to have already identified their mentor. This can be an attorney or fully accredited representative with removal defense experience in your organization, or it could be someone who is outside your organization, or have worked with. So we really encourage applicants to start developing a plan with their mentor early on to get that court experience. And the more opportunity you have to work on court cases and observe court hearings, the more confident and more experienced you will be once you apply for full accreditation and upon you getting approved for full accreditation. I do want to mention that regarding hearings for the full accreditation application, you don't need to have attended an individual hearing. I know many people are always seeking for that opportunity, and sometimes it may be a little bit difficult, but for the purpose of full accreditation application, master calendar hearings is sufficient. But we do encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to attend individual hearings, since that will be really helpful for you to know what to expect when you take on your first case. And lastly, if you are not familiar with the requirements for full accreditation, please watch the recorded webinar on applying for full accreditation. I know a few people had asked about certain requirements for accreditation, whether it's partial or full. Please do take advantage of our resources on our website, the DOJ Recognition Accreditation Toolkit, which contains a recorded webinar on DOJ recognition and partial accreditation, as well as a recorded webinar on full accreditation, which discusses the application process as well as requirements for applying for accreditation. So once you've completed your court skills, your time should be spent on preparing your full accreditation application. You'll want to continue, of course, with your immigration court experience, review the resources I kind of mentioned on our DOJ RNA toolkit. This toolkit does contain a lot of resources related to recognition and accreditation, including a step-by-step guide that provides a comprehensive overview of recognition and accreditation and the eligibility requirements for full accreditation. Also in this step-by-step guide are sample documents, which we encourage participants to review prior to assembling their own documents for full accreditation. And of course, if you have any questions or want consultation on the application, please contact Clinic. This includes reviewing your application prior to submission. And for affiliates, you can send your questions as well as your applications for us to review through the affiliate support form. And we will also offer one-on-one consultation days where participants can sign up for meeting times to meet with one of us if they have questions about their application. And again, of course, please feel free to submit your final draft for Clinic for us to provide you with feedback prior to submission. And we do expect that participants submit their full accreditation application to OLAP before or by August 31st, 2024. And once you do submit it, to let Clinic know when it was filed and provide us with a copy of the application. So within a month of receiving a decision on your full accreditation application, we would ask participants to provide us with a final report that explains how this training and full accreditation process has impacted you professionally and your organization's capacity to serve your local immigrant communities. And if you did not obtain full accreditation status or you weren't able to file, to please also explain why you weren't able to complete this requirement. And just for everyone's information right now, processing times with partial as well as full accreditation applications, we're looking at about 60 to 90 day period. And so if anyone is aware that processing times for the past couple of years has been quite long and extensive, dating back to almost a year before OLAP gets back to your application. So we really welcome this change and this expediency that the processing time is back to normal. Okay, and then we are just going to wrap this session up with the resources I kind of mentioned earlier. First is the partial to full webpage that has all the information that we've covered today, including the slides and the informational webinar, as well as a sample agreement for those who are selected into this program. There is a sample agreement for participants as well as their supervisors to review and sign. and also a sample project timeline and summary of steps. So Liz had covered the timeline of activity. So everything that she noted is in further detail in that sample project timeline and summary of steps. So I highly encourage you, if you are interested in applying for a space in this training program, to review this, this sample document. And then along with that is an action plan for full accreditation that allows you to plan out the process for you to file your application. So it's another helpful document for those who are going to be filing for full accreditation. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the DOJ RNA toolkit and the step-by-step guide on DOJ recognition accreditation, as well as the requirements for full accreditation. So all of that you can find on our partial to full webpage. And the link is listed there on the slide. Okay. All right. I'm gonna finish it up to see if there's any questions. Any further questions? I see we have several questions here actually before we wrap up the session. Let's see. I guess I'll just read them out loud, Liz.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Helen.
Okay, instead of typing. Okay, yes. Well, will we get updates in those 60 to 90 days, or just wait until we get the full information? I assume you're asking about the processing time for the applications, maybe? Please correct me if I'm wrong. You can feel free to type in another question, but the processing time, once you file your full accreditation application, we're looking about 60 to 90 day processing time before OLAP gets back to you about your application.
There's a question about the recency of the COIL, Helen, that someone completed in 2020 and wants to know if they need to do it again before applying for partial.
Okay, so I definitely encourage you to review the DOJ recognition accreditation recorded webinar that's posted on our toolkit about the requirements. But generally for partial accreditation, as well as full, OLAP prefers trainings to not go back further than 3 years from the time of filing the application. So if you have taken a COIL in 2020, hopefully you'll be able to file your partial accreditation very soon, because that'll be about 3 years since if you are planning to file this year, since you last took the COIL training.
I see some people are more interested in partial, and I'm just
Yeah.
continuing to share the link to the website with the toolkit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so for this webinar, this is an informational webinar about our initiative. So if you are interested about or learning about requirements on how to obtain partial or full accreditation, we definitely recommend you to take a look at our DOJ recognition accreditation toolkit, which contains recorded webinars for those interested in applying for partial or full accreditation. So someone asked about whether this training will count for full accreditation. Absolutely. That's the idea for having the partial to full accreditation initiative is to encourage more fully accredited representatives in the field. So this essentially was developed in mind to provide a comprehensive core skills training for those interested in full accreditation, developing the legal research, writing, and advocacy skills that are necessary for full accreditation. So absolutely, this will count towards the requirements for the application. Sorry, we have a lot of questions coming in, so we might take
People
them
are
off.
just asking for the application, so I'm just responding to those.
Okay.
We put it in the chat several times how you get the application. It was also on the slide that Helen was on a couple slides ago that were emailed to you. So you can find it there, but I'm just also responding, putting that in the chat. let's see.
You can file the full accreditation application anytime you are ready. So you don't have to wait until after the court skills training if you feel like you have sufficient amount of court experience. Although if you have taken the court skills training, you include that in your resume. So it depends on where you are at already in the full accreditation application process. But if you want to file shortly after, that's wonderful. You don't have to wait until August. August is just our deadline for those who are enrolled in the program. So we definitely encourage those who are ready to file earlier. There's no set number of hours of observations for master calendar hearings for full accreditation. Again, referring to you to review the recorded webinar full accreditation. It's just good to have court observations in your application as a way to demonstrate that you have advocacy skills. And so there's no set number, so you will be providing immigration court log. And you can review all those requirements on the DOJ Recognition Accreditation Toolkit.
Another question about court observation says, what do they consist of? It can be as Helen said, it could be master calendar or individual hearings in immigration court. They can be virtual hearings, as many hearings are these days, or they could be in person. And again, this is something we're trying to work on a little bit because I know it's been a little hard. Like in some ways it's easier that it's virtual because you can just click on a link, but in some ways it's harder because the judge often wants you to get permission from the attorney before you sit in. So it's easier with master, it's a little easier to observe, but we'll also try to make sure you have opportunities for individuals as well.
Go
ahead. Sorry.
Just a reminder, if everybody could put their questions into the question and answer box, that will really help us. I know there was a few questions also on the chat about the requirements for mentor. I just wanted to mention this because finding a mentor, I think it's often one of the more difficult parts of the application process. And the requirement, I would say, is just that mentor that you will be working under has removal defense experience. And ideally, they have active cases in court so you can get that experience with them, such as drafting documents for immigration court, observing individual hearings if they have any hearings coming up. So this is something that you probably want to talk to this person that you've identified, who you want to establish a relationship with going forward, and see how you could plan out that immigration court experience for you.
Gwen, do you mind putting in the chat? A lot of people are still asking for the link to the application. Can you just put it in the chat again? Thank you. So I hope that answers those questions that came in. I'm going to just go ahead and delete those, but it will take you to the website with a pretty straightforward application. So
there's someone also asking about, do we have to commit to a number of removal defense cases per year? I'll just answer in terms of the application, the training program requirements. There's no set number of removal defense cases that we expect you to take within a number of years. We just expect that you take an removal defense cases shortly after you get full accreditation. We're not limiting that to a time frame. We know it depends on individual circumstances and how ready you are. The important thing is that you are ready to take a removal defense case. And sometimes for people, it might be, in a couple of weeks after getting approval. It might be a month after approval. So we just hope that you make a good faith attempt to utilize your full accreditation once you get approved.
what about applying for full accreditation outright instead of partial, Helen?
Yes, so I mentioned we had someone in our 2022 cohort who actually applied for full accreditation outright without first obtaining partial accreditation. And that's There is no requirement that you got to do partial first before full. One thing you got to keep in mind is that for full accreditation, you have to satisfy the requirements for partial accreditation as well as full accreditation. So you'll need to have taken that COIL course or that overview of immigration law course, such as COIL, as well as several immigration law training courses for partial, and also have gained immigration experience for partial, as well as all the requirements for full accreditation too. The COIL certificate for COIL. So in general immigration law trainings, I might have answered this earlier, is that OLAP prefers that trainings are recent, and usually we are talking about 3 years from date of filing the application.
I'm just deleting the because there's a few questions like that. So
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
delete this. Okay. I'm not sure if we're an affiliate with clinic, does our agency still need to apply for initial accreditation through DOJ?
I'm not affiliated with clinic. Accreditation. Well, you don't, then I assume you're talking about partial accreditation. I think I mentioned that earlier. It depends whether you satisfy the requirements for both partial to full and full. So it depends on, you just need to satisfy requirements for both in order for you to apply for full accreditation. So I see there's a lot of questions on DOJ recognition accreditation and what the requirements are. So again, I really recommend everyone to take a look at our recorded webinars on those two topics. And so please visit that website. We have a wealth of resources on DOJ recognition accreditation and the requirements in the application process. Okay. So I think we will be posting the application shortly after the informational webinar. I think someone just mentioned that.
Yeah, it will be available right after. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that is the link, but if you don't see it now, you'll see it shortly.
Oh, here might be a question for you, Liz. How does working with victims of crime assisting in creating VAWA and U visa packets since 2013 help me in getting partial to full? Well, I guess the partial to, I mean, for full accreditation, just to let you know, is for you to be able to represent someone in immigration court. And so I've done VAWA and U visas before, and you know, those immigration benefits are pretty extensive, requires a little bit of advocacy skills when you're writing the cover letters and advocating why this individual might benefit from a VAWA or U visa. And so just developing those legal skills and advocacy skills can help you in obtaining full accreditation. And Liz, I mean, some of them actually end up in removal defense. I mean, removal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the idea here, right? Like you do certainly have people with U's or VAWA self-petitioners who are in removal proceedings. So it's helpful to have someone who can represent in the full process, right? So that's certainly helpful experience if you meet the other, you know, the other criteria. I guess I'm not quite sure if this person is already partially accredited, but I mean, it sounds like it's helpful experience, but you just want to make sure you meet the other criteria for participation in the program.
Can you submit a full DOJ accreditation without court experience? That's a good question. We haven't seen anybody try to submit one without any court experience. We have seen someone submit it without any court observations, but I think it'll be difficult for you to convince OLAP that you have, developed the legal research and writing and advocacy skills needed for court representation. So under that requirement, you'll need to demonstrate that what have you been doing in order to develop those skills for court representation. So usually it's drafting, helping attorneys draft motions, or it could be, writing, these compelling, cover letters for VAWA or U visas demonstrating that this person is eligible. So kind of you might need to, provide some evidence that you have developed these skills some way and somehow. And usually it's through working with an attorney mentor or fully accredited rep in immigration court. So yeah, the last question, I'm partially accredited, but switching jobs and reapplying for accreditation with the new job. Can I still apply for a partial to full initiative? It's right now we I kind of mentioned about the selection criteria, and we are going to be giving preference to clinic affiliates who are partially accredited representative. And for some reason, if you do just end up changing jobs, then at that time, we would like you to continue with your full accreditation. But of course, then you'll need to, as I mentioned, you don't need to apply for partial first in order to get full. So if you already have partial accreditation, then you might want to just move forward with the full accreditation. But of course, we are giving preference to those who are clinic affiliates who have partial accreditation.
Question, does the mentor have to be currently practicing in court? I mean, I think ideally, right, they might be able to provide you some mentorship based on prior experience, but I think ideally this is something where, you'll be able to go observe with them, or maybe look over a current case that they have. So I guess it's possible, like if they were doing removal defense pretty recently and just kind of stopped recently, but I think ideally you'd be working with someone who's currently practicing. Question about, can we also attend criminal trials, or does it have to be only immigration trials to get the experience? You would need to show immigration court observation, since criminal, a trial at a criminal state level is going to be very different than what you would be doing as a DOJ fully accredited rep. So you need to make sure you get that immigration observation as well. I think that's all the questions that I see open, Helen.
Yeah.
So thanks, everyone.
Okay, great.
And yeah.
Sorry, one last question is, what are the chances of non-affiliates getting selected? We will consider non-affiliates in our selection process. So we do want to encourage you to submit your application, but we are giving preference to clinic affiliates.
Well, I hope you all apply, and look forward to getting those applications.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you, Liz.
Bye.